Today we're going to take a look at graphing, sine and cosine day 2. So in yesterday's assignment that you did on Desmos, you talked a lot in your responses about the wave height changes and the wavelength changes. So today what we're going to do is we're just going to put some of the mathematical terms into that. So the two equations that you looked at last night were A equals the sine of bx and y equals A times the cosine of bx. So if you bring up Desmos here, let's see, y equals A, should work, I think, sine of x. And if we add that slider for A, we'll actually put in a B there too. Where's the B? Okay, so right now they're both 1, and we can see as we switch to the A, the amplitude changes. And you notice as it goes negative, it's a reflection. Well, what happens when we switch to the B? Well, those waves get bigger and smaller. So technical names for those. A equals our amplitude. The height of that wave from the midline. B has to do with our period, which is the wavelength. Which is called our period, and that is calculated 2 pi over b. And so what that means is a complete period is done in a wavelength here. So our wavelength here goes from 0 to about, let's see, right here. So 0 to 2 pi. But you'll notice as we switch that b, what is our wavelength here? 0, and it comes back right here, 20 pi over 1. So let's take a look at graphing a couple of problems. So the first one we're going to take a look at is y equals 3, the sine of 4x. So if we identify things, our amplitude equals 3. So our period would be 2 pi over 4, which is equal to pi over 2. So now when we graph this here, our midline is at 0, and so it goes up 3 and down 3 because of that amplitude. And it really doesn't matter. We don't have to count tick marks as long as we label it. So 3 and negative 3. Our period is pi over 2, so we know it does a complete cycle in pi over 2. So that means it goes high, mid, low, mid, high, a complete wave. So each of those is called our critical points. And to find our critical points, think of like a circle where we have 1, 2, 3, 4, those 4 critical points on our unit circle. So we can take pi over 2 times 1/4. So it's pi over 8. So our first mark would be at 1 pi over 8, 2 pi over 8, and 2 pi over 8 is pi over 4, 3 pi over 8, and then 4 pi over 8, which is pi over 2. And we'll graph a positive cycle and a negative cycle. Now sine. So if we think of our unit circle at our start, 1, 0 is the coordinate. Sine is our y value. So sine's going to start at 0. And then it goes up, back to the mid, low, mid. And we can keep those going low, mid, high, mid. So a lot of these waves are going to look alike. We just have to take a look at, it really is our scaling. So if we take a look at another one, let's take a look at y equals negative 4, the cosine of 1/2 x. So if we identify everything, our amplitude is 4. You'll notice it's a negative 4, but we know that negative is a reflection. our period would be 2 pi divided by half. So half goes into 2 4 times, or we could say we multiply by the reciprocal times 2 over 1, so it's 4 pi. And then our critical points would be 4 pi times 1/4. So they're going to occur every pi. All right, so we have an amplitude. I will just put 4 and -4. So we have 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. And now it is a cosine. So again, think back to our unit circle. Our start right here at 0 degrees, 1, 0. So cosine usually starts at 1. So now it starts since our amplitude at 4, but because of this negative, it's going to start at -4. So then it has to go to our mid, our high, our mid, our low. And then if we follow it backwards here, we have that one. So let's take a look at one more. Let's look at y equals -2 the sine of x. So our amplitude would be 2. Our period would be 2 pi over 1. So that's 2 pi. And then our critical points would be 2 pi times 1/4. So that'd be 2 pi over 4, which reduces down to pi over 2. And that makes sense. You think about our period's 2 pi, so that's what our normal unit circle is. So we have 2 and -2. So we have 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, which is pi, 3 pi over 2, and 4 pi over 2, which is 2 pi. And we could, make these waves go on forever, but we'll just do a positive and negative. So where does this one start? So we think unit circle. Here's our start. Sine. Sine is our y value. So it starts at 0. But we have a negative. So instead of going up, it's going to go down. And then we have our graph.